Hello everyone, I'm Rishabh and welcome to Design Dialogue episode 2. I hope you watched our first episode, which was how to choose a design discipline after your foundation course. We touched upon a topic of design research in our first video. If you have not yet watched that video, here's the link. And today we'll be continuing our discussion on design research. So to do that, I have an expert with me today who will be taking care of design research, the importance of design research, what are the different methods of design research. So to do that, let's welcome our guest today, Satya Srivastava.
Hello, my name is Satya Srivastava and here is my design journey. So, I graduated from MIT Institute of Design as a product designer in the year 2020 and I did my final year thesis at Honeywell in Bangalore. And right now, I'm working as a full-time design researcher at this firm called as Turian Labs in Pune. So, Turian Labs is an innovation strategy consultant firm where it typically caters to global tech giants like the world's most popular search engine, international finance, healthcare, oil and gas companies, and other organizations like that. So, typically, what this work entails as is understanding the company's domain, their appetite for innovation, and then recommending solutions and strategies for them to expand their businesses. So, the biggest shock that I received as a designer when I started doing my internship was how, despite the fact that we followed the same design process, uh, the amount of emphasis that was given to each stage was different in college and it was different at Honeywell. So, what I mean by that is typically in college, a lot of our energies are spent into ideation, into making CAD models, and into ensuring that the final output looks good, feels good, and the renders are beautiful and things of that nature, which makes sense, which have these types of skills have their own values. But once I moved on to Honeywell, it seemed like research was like a layer of work that required the most amount of emphasis. And the reason for this is that this is based on my understanding that the reason for this is at firms like Honeywell that develop products, they tend to invest a lot on a particular design. If there isn't a need for a product that's being developed, no matter how beautiful it looks, no matter how glorious the renders are, the product will not do well and it will eventually be a liability for the firm, right? So, this shift in emphasis from the last stage of the design process in college to the first phase of the design process at the corporate made me realize that research is much more than what we are taught to believe back in schools, design schools, and that's when I started getting curious about design research. And that's why I decided to shift my career from being a product designer to being a design researcher. So, because my experience at Honeywell had been very intriguing, I got more and more interested in why research was important in the development phase, in the product development phase. And then I understood that unless and until you know what the problem is and how critical the problem is that you're trying to solve, it doesn't make sense to invest a lot of resources into developing a solution that probably a lot of people can live without. So after that, I started looking for places that would let me explore design research as a domain, as an area of expertise. And I stumbled across the place that I'm currently working at. And after joining here, I realized that design research is one small part of the entire business ecosystem. So I was lucky enough to find a place that was an innovation strategy consultant firm. What that means is it would help any product or service developer to innovate. So innovation in itself is a giant monster that needs a lot of different approaches to address. So it's not just design research, it's also market research, conducting surveys, understanding the scale of the problem, doing a lot of quant studies, focus group discussions, etc. So after I joined the place that I'm currently working at, I got exposed to various facets of how to do research.
Satya, it's very impressive how deeply you are involved in design research process now. And we would be very interested in knowing different methods of research because we all know that research is important, but how to go about it? What are the different methods you can apply to do the design research? So can you touch upon those topics, those different methods of design?
So, since design research in itself has various types and subtypes of studies that can be conducted within this domain, I would like to spend some time talking about these, right? So, uh, although there are a lot of different types of researches, the four most popular ones are foundational, evaluatory, retention, and collaborative. So I would like to spend a little more time on each of them. So a foundational study typically is about understanding whether a particular user group uh, has a certain type of a mental model or not, and understanding their context, their culture, their problems, and empathizing with them to gain a deeper insight into what exactly is it that they are trying to say but are unable to articulate, right? So, what that would mean is somebody saying that I would, since I get cheated at petrol pumps, I would like to have a a self-service petrol station, right? So typically a market researcher would come up to you and tell you that there is a need for self-service fuel stations, but it's a design researcher's skill who will be able to tell you that the problem is that the customers feel cheated at petrol pumps, right? So identifying these levels of insights is what a foundational study entails, right? So typically, while conducting a foundational study, the design method that you follow would be a semi-structured conversation. So we have these guides for discussion. As a researcher, you get into a participant's house and you have a semi-structured conversation with them about their daily lives, about how they like to spend their time, what do they do when they're free, what has their experience been like buying things online and things of that sort. So you try to gauge their tech literacy, you try to gauge their aspirations, ambitions, their apprehensions. So that's what a foundational study entails. After that, there is an evaluatory study. Another type of a design research method would be evaluatory, where let's say a design team has come up with a solution, either a product based solution or a service based solution. So, as a researcher, what we are supposed to do is design an interaction where the participants can come and engage with the product or the service in the most in a way that resembles the actual thing the most, and then you give out pointers to the design team saying that these were the areas that the participants struggled navigating through and things of that sort. So the most common type of test that you guys must be aware of would be A/B testing, where two prototypes that are nearly the same, that do mostly the same function, have different UI elements, and then they get tested out by several participants. And then these participants articulate that probably this color doesn't look good, this size of the button doesn't fit them well, etc. After that, there is another type of research which is called the retention research, where let's say a product has already been developed and it's launched in the market, and all the foundational and the evaluatory test results are coming out great, but however the product developers are realizing that people tend to drop off from their products, which means that they don't use it for a longer period of time. So as researchers, we need to intervene there as well and try to understand what is it that the user is trying to seek out of the product and is unable to receive from it, and how can we change that. So an example of that would be doing diary studies. So diary studies is a method where you hand out a product to a participant. They use it over a period of time, and you keep speaking to them at every regular interval, and you try to record and monitor how their experience using the product has evolved. What were the low points, what were the high points, and at what point does the user feel that the product doesn't add them any value. So this would be like a typical retention study. This is what it would look like. After that, my personal favorite would be a collaborative study where designers, researchers, and participants, all of them come together and try to brainstorm uh, products and solutions to solve their issues. So typically a study like this happens after the research team and the design team has some visibility about what are the common issues that users typically tend to feel. And once we have articulated and defined the problems well, we pose this problem back to the users and ask them to solve these issues and ask them what would be the most appropriate method of solving these issues. So, unlike the traditional method of doing research, where we try to probe into the participants' mental models and understand their pain points and then report it back to the design team, the collaborative method of doing research is much better because what happens is if you're sitting at the table with the participants, oftentimes while trying to brainstorm, they tend to have these conversations where they rationalize why certain things would work for them and why certain things would not work for them. So our insights as design researchers lie in those conversations and not in the final solutions that these participants come up with. So this becomes the design researcher's responsibility to extract this type of an information from the conversation that's being happening. So it's the design researcher's skill or sensibility to understand what is being said without it being said, right? So the skill of reading between the lines, the skill of understanding what exactly is it that the person needs and is not talking about. So now, having talked about the various design methods that a researcher can employ to understand what's the ecosystem around, now I would like to spend some time on explaining how to go about selecting one of these design research methods, right? So this is extremely subjective to the context of the project, right? So, and it also depends on the appetite of innovation for the company that is hiring you as a consultant. What I mean by that is, depending on what the client is wanting to understand, the design research needs to be accommodative of that. So again, this is the researcher's skill to understand the pros and cons of each research method and try and the researcher needs to attempt to match the pros and cons to what the client wants to understand. So that in itself is a skill as well. A lot of extensive reading and understanding about what all are the newer design research methods, and also doing a lot of trial and error while the research is happening is required to be able to perfect this particular skill. So unlike how in college we tend to use design as a process to develop products, while we are doing research, we use design as a process to do research, right? So a lot of design thinking is involved in trying to design a research proposal.
As a design researcher, how does your day look like?
So since a lot of work that is done is for these clients that have a certain user segment, so we need to be able to identify who all fall under this particular user segment and where will we find them and at what time will we find them, and then traveling to them to gain insights about how do they go about interacting with their environment, right? So an example of that would be, let's say somebody's developing an app for users that have low tech literacy. So in this particular case, chances are that in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, you would find such people who tend to have, who are not very highly educated, their qualifications aren't very flashy and things like that. So the research team would have to travel to these cities and spend time with the participants at their homes, click pictures, and get to taste a slice of their life, right? So this is what a design researcher's life looks like. Most of the time you'd be spending on field, and depending on what exactly is your role as a design researcher, oftentimes the team lead or the team manager tends to stay back and do the work at the back end, whereas the research team travels and gathers information and sends it back home, where the manager sits and does synthesis with the extended team. So depending on what your role is, you may or may not spend a lot of time traveling.
Thank you so much, Satya, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me and letting me talk about my experiences. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope at least one person is able to make better decisions because of the information that I just shared.
So, guys, this was all about design research and its methods. I hope we could help you guys by explaining all those methods and importance of design research in the process of design. And if you have any questions, you can put your questions in comment section. We will be doing a follow-up video to answer all your questions. So guys, stay subscribed, stay notified so that you get all the updates from our channel about the design dialogue further episodes. Thank you and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.